This video will be starting into what we're calling phase 4. It's just another step in the C programming process. In this one right here, we're going to get started with string utilities, but we're going to show a couple of other things along the way. For example, we're going to show how to do a second file and how to do that compiling process. Let's go ahead and jump into the code here. This is our empty function right here. We're going to start here, and this should always be like this, although as you'll find a little later on, there'll be one more addition as we go along. So let's go ahead and specify what the main function is going to do. This is the specification standard that we will be using for all of our functions. It's a little different than you might have seen in the previous phases, but this is the one we'll use from here on out. So in this particular case, it's the main function. It's going to find the length of a string and it's going to display it. There's no input parameters and output parameters. Note that there could be input parameters if there's command line operations there, but we're not doing that, and we don't need to really do that until that time comes. So no input and output parameters. It's going to return 0, which is success to the operating system. The result is going to be displayed as specified, and it will have to use stdio tools for this operation. It will also need to use another function that we'll come up with in just a moment. All right, let's take a look at what's going to be inside of this. We always start by initializing the function and the variables. So we'll go ahead and do that, and that's the initialize the function variables. Then the next step will be to conduct the actual string length test. We're not taking any input to the user, but we will provide output. Next up, we will go ahead and display that result to the user. And finally, we will go ahead and shut down the program. So that's our step 1 of this operation. And let's go ahead and get into step 2. In step 2, we expand the meaning of this. If you think about this, step 1 actually writes the whole program. We're going to initialize the function variables. We're going to conduct the string length test. We're going to display the results. We're going to shut down the program. That is a complete program. That does everything. But we'd like to expand it out a little bit further so we can take it from there and write code. So the next thing up under initialize here will be to create a test string. We're going to declare some other variables, and we're going to display a title. Conducting the string length test, really, when we get to it, is going to be a function. Displaying is just going to be an operation, but shutting down the program is going to take a little bit more here. We're going to display the program end, and we are going to return the program success. So now we've done our step 1 statements. We've done our step 2 statements. We're ready for our step 3 statements, and we'll do that now. The step 3 part of this process will be to identify, locate, and specify what the functions will do. In this case, creating a text string is just an assignment. Declaring variables is declaration. Displaying the title is going to require a printf. So we will specify the function printf. Now we're going to specify it. We're also locating it here where it goes, but we don't have to specify it beyond what it is because it's a library function. And now we're going to conduct the string length test. Now that's going to take the function we're going to create. We'll call it getStringLength. So before we go on here, we need to do the specification of getStringLength. Let's do that now. Now up here under a thing called function prototypes, this is a little bit of fib. It's going to come back more correct later. But for right now, this is where you have to put functions for C or prototypes. Again, we'll talk about that. But you always have to put the functions you're going to use before you use them. So we're putting this up right here, right now, until we can discuss it a little further. So the first thing we'll do is we'll put up our specification. We're going to say we're going to get string length, that's the name, finds the length of a string, counting characters up to the null character. It's going to take in a C-style string, char star. It's going to not pass anything back by way of parameters. It will return the length of a string, which will be an int, and nothing happening on the I/O devices and no other dependencies here. Once we have the specification, we know enough to go ahead and create a stub function. So we'll go ahead and create its header here, the getStringLength. We use our instructions here. Now, anytime you're going to put a string into any parameter, if it's not meant to be changed, it needs the constant keyword. So we put that in there. It's going to return an int as specified here. So we're good there. Let's go ahead and put our curly braces in there, aligned and vertically. And then last but not least, we'll put on our return because the compiler needs to see this return 0. And we note temporary stub return so we don't forget about it later. But it needs to see this. If we didn't put this in here, the compiler is going to have a complaint about no return from a non-void function or something like that. So at this point now, it's a good idea, since we've written some code, to go ahead and compile. Let's do that now. Now to start with, we're going to use a command line compile operation, just to give you that experience. You can compile a function, you can compile a complete program, you can compile multiple file programs, and in this particular case, you are compiling just one complete program here. However, the other thing you can also do is you can compile individual object files, which we will discuss a little bit later on. But here's our GCC. We always put -wall in there. Make sure we catch all the errors and warnings. File name -o to give it a name, and then phase 4 will be the name of it. We get that. We get no complaints, and it looks like we have a program here. In fact, we can even run this here, /phase 4. Doesn't do anything because not supposed to, but it's a chance to try that out. So let's go ahead and step away from that. We're back into our program here. getStringLength has been located. It has been specified and has been identified. Here's what it's going to be. Now displaying the result to the user is going to take a printf, put that right there, and shut down the program. Step 2 is here, display program end. That's going to need a printf as well. Return program success. Now here's where this had to be in here again to compile correctly, but now I'm going to actually move it up to where it belongs in the code here. So that will go under the return program success as return 0. So we have now completed step 3. All the functions have been located, identified, and in one case specified. We're ready to go on to step 4 now. As you should have read at this point, this is called iterative refinement, meaning we iterate, we repeat, we go through the whole thing. We did it once for step 1, step 2, step 3, and we're now doing it for step 4. We create the test string here. We can use empty brackets as long as we give it data, but just remember it'll never be any larger than this with the null character on the end. So we can do that, that's okay. Declaring other variables. I believe we're going to have a string length we're going to capture that data with. Then we're going to have the string length test program title. Then we're going to actually conduct the test. And so we put that in there. String length is equal to getStringLength with the test string here that we were given. We display the result to the user. Notice I'm going to put single quotes on each side of that. And to be able to do that, I have to use the control character there. And then we'll put the test string and strlen in there. That's looking good. And then we'll put a display end of program. Now, the display end of program really doesn't do too much. However, it's a good idea to have in a program in case you've got a program that's still running and you think it's stopped or frozen. If it says program end, you've made it to the end. If it doesn't, then you've already got a diagnostic tool built in. Okay, so this is step 4. The next thing we need to do is compile it because we've written code here. Normally, I would compile every 2 or 3 lines, but I'm going to compile here just to make sure there's no mistakes. Back to the command line. You know that you can do this from the WinSCP editors as we've been doing and keep a separate screen going with your command line so that you can do this. So we'll go ahead and run this right here. And it looks like we've got a good compile. We'll go ahead and get back to our code. Step 4 means we've written the program. There is no need to go back. Once we've done the program, we know it's doing everything we wanted it to do. We know it's all set up. We know it compiles. And the reason it compiles is because we put that return 0 in there. If we'd taken that out, we'd have had a problem. All right, so we're going to come back here. That step 4 is done. The main or the function, the main program is done. So now we can get into getStringLength and do the step 5 part of it, which is the design part of the function. Let's go ahead and do that now. Now the step 5 part of this is recursive. In other words, it's step 1, 2, and 3, but inside the function. So let's do our step 1 here, the getStringLength. We almost always start with the initialization of the function and the variables. We're going to do a loop to the end of the string. It's a good idea to do the end loop just so that you know what's inside that code block there. We will put that in the return index length there. And then the next thing we're going to do is put our update index in here. Now that would be, these are all step 1 statements. there's really not any step 2 statements that are necessary here. So now we can put in there the step that was step 1. Step 2 is really not necessary. Now step 3 is the part where you're going to identify, specify, and locate functions. However, there's not going to be any functions here. This is just simple, straightforward code. So our step 3 is done here, and steps 1, 2, and 3 inside the function comprise step 5. So now we're going to go to step 6 and put the code in there. Let's do that now. And so the step 5 part of this process has been done. We've designed the stuff in the function, and now all I have to do is fill in blanks to put the code in the function. So let's do that. For our initialize here, we're going to go ahead and put in an index that we can count with. We're going to loop to the end of the string as specified up here, counting characters. So we'll put that in there. We'll create our block, and then we'll put our update in here, and that's all we have to do here. And then finally, we'll go ahead and put the index, which now will be, in fact, be the length of this string. Having done that, then we can go ahead and take out this last part that was temporary. So now we have this. The next thing to do at this point is to do the compiling process. We'll go ahead and punch this up right here. Oh, and we've got a couple of problems here. We've got a standard strlen undeclared and a null character undeclared. And we have this declaration of function. Let's solve these one at a time. These are two constants right here that I threw into the code. Let's take a look. I put the standard strlength. We're protecting this from going beyond a certain level. And here we're watching for that null character. And so with this in mind, we need to have the constants created in this program to do that. Well, here's what I have done. I have previously created what I call standard constants, and the standard constants has some different ones. I use these for different parts of different things we've done, and you'll see their use a little bit later on. We're using the pound defined, which is kind of old-timey right now. It is the most functional and the least hassle for the constants we're going to need against using other possibilities. So I have my standard strlength down here of 64, and I have my null character of \0 ready to go. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to include this in my file. I'm going to bring it up here. And when we have header files, I'm going to do pound include standard constants .h. And now let's go ahead and go back to that picture here. We also have implicit declaration of function printf. In other words, it doesn't know what that is. So what we're going to do there is say find printf is in the stdio library. So we will do that, pound include stdio.h. Okay, we'll put those in here, and now we can go back and do another compile. Let's try that again here, and we have a good compile. So we've cleaned this up, and again, it's the reason to check the compile very, very frequently. Now, the last thing to figure out here is, does this thing work? Let's take a quick look at the program again. The program is going to say, I've set up a string. I'm going to have a title. I'm going to display the string length here, and then I'm going to end the program. Okay, so let's see what that does. Come out to here. We've already compiled it, so we'll do our ./phase4. Notice that I'm using capital P for the phase4.c file, the source file, but I'm using lowercase phase4 for the executable. This doesn't really matter, and it's not a standard, but I am doing something different so there wouldn't be confusion. So I do my ./phase4. We run this thing, string length test program, the length of the string. Notice those single quotes that I put in there at each end, and the count is 29, which we can verify as needed. And we have program end, knowing that this program completed everything it was supposed to do. So this is about it. But now that we've done this, I want to point out a couple more things here in the file here. And I mentioned this before about prototypes and so on. You must have the function ahead of where you use it. That's required in C. However, you don't have to have the whole function. Sometimes you can do a thing called a forward declaration or a prototype. So I'm going to make a change here. And where I used to have the function, I just have what's called, again, a forward declaration or a prototype. Now you'll notice down here, and what we'll have down here that I also mentioned before is we'll call it function implementations. And that will be your getString. Nothing's changed here, but I've put a prototype up here instead of the whole function. This keeps the main up near the beginning of the file, so I don't end up with a main that's 1,000 lines down or something like that. Let's go verify that this is okay. Compiles well, runs well. This is success. And with that, we're going to wrap this up. This is, again, an opportunity to just get started with a string utility that we've already created. We've seen the ability to use a file, an H file, standalone H file, by the way, that has our constants in it. We've looked at function prototypes at the very beginning. We are going to take a look at that a little bit later on and make another change or two that you'll see then. But for right now, we'll go ahead and finish this one up.